The Neanderthals, portrayed as the primitive ancestor of man by evolutionists, has been definitely shown to be a lost human race. The Neanderthals were human beings who appeared suddenly in Europe around 100,000 years ago and vanished just as suddenly and silently 35,000 years ago, or else became assimilated with other races. The only difference between them and the modern man is that their skeletons were slightly stronger and they had slightly larger skulls. Neanderthals were a human race, and this is now agreed by just about everyone. Evolutionists made great effort to depict these human beings as a primitive species, but all the discoveries made showed that the Neanderthals were no different to a well-built person walking along the streets today. The Neanderthals most closely resemble the Eskimos living in the cold climates today. Discoveries have shown that the Neanderthals buried their dead, made musical instruments of various kinds, and shared a highly developed culture with humans. The New Mexico University paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkos, regarded as an authority on the subject, writes, "Detailed comparisons of Neanderthal skeletal remains with those of modern humans have shown that there is nothing in Neanderthal anatomy that conclusively indicates locomotor, manipulative, intellectual, or linguistic abilities inferior to those of modern humans." Today, however, scientists and researchers agree that the Neanderthals were nothing more than now extinct human race. Thus, it was that another false proof that evolutionists for years attempted to depict as a link in the supposed evolution of man vanished from the scene. Evolutionists looking for imaginary half-ape, half-human fossils did not regard backing their theory up with fake fossils alone as at all adequate. They also imagined that they might be able to find living specimens of the evidence they needed in various parts of the world. The result of the frantic endeavors evolutionists made in order to find living proof of evolution once more unmasked the fanatical devotion they felt for their theory. Evolutionists would stop at nothing in order to find evidence, but their next move was to be far more barbaric than those that had gone before. The barbarity committed by an evolutionist researcher by the name of Samuel Werner in 1904 came about as the result of his search for living evidence in the Congo. Werner captured an African pygmy known as Ota Benga a married man and father of 2 children, whom he depicted as evidence that human beings had evolved from apes. Despite being a human being, Ota Benga was chained like an animal, kept in a cage and taken to America. On his arrival in America, Ota Benga was put on display in a cage with various species of ape at the St. Louis World Fair. Ota Benga, depicted as if the closest intermediate form to man, was transferred to the Bronx Zoo in New York 2 years later. There he was put on display as the so-called ancestor of man alongside a gorilla called Dinah and an orangutan known as Duhang. Evolutionist publications immediately began carrying articles about Ota Benga. Thousands of people flooded to the zoo to catch sight of Ota Benga, who was treated savagely just like an ordinary animal. The director of the zoo, the evolutionist Dr. William T. Hornaday, made a number of speeches describing his pride at having a supposed intermediate form in his zoo. Ota Benga eventually killed himself. This event is significant in revealing the irrational and unconscionable practices that Darwinists might resort to in order to pursue the lie of evolution. Despite their abysmal failure when it comes to finding any scientific evidence with which to support their theory, evolutionists are still remarkably successful in one sphere: propaganda. The most important component of that propaganda is the fake illustrations known as reconstructions. The word reconstruction is based on the concept of rebuilding, and is the production of a picture or model of a living thing on the basis of nothing more than a fragment of bone and a large amount of imagination. All the ape men that so often appear in newspapers, magazines, and films are in fact imaginary reconstructions. Inspired by fossil remains, these reconstructions are designed and produced entirely with the aim of supporting the claims of the theory of evolution. They are totally divorced from reality, however. The aim behind this is to use picture or models to convince people that the imaginary life forms concerned did actually exist at one time. It needs to be made crystal clear here that only the very general characteristics of a fossil can be established from the bone remains. It is impossible, on the basis of these bone remains, to draw any conclusions regarding the physical appearance, skin, muscle tissue, facial lines, nose, ears, eyes, hair, and similar features of a living thing. The fact is that the details that really determine physical appearances are the soft tissues that gradually vanish over the course of time. Ernst A. Houghton from Harvard University describes the position by saying, "To attempt to restore the soft parts is an even more hazardous undertaking. The lips, the eyes, the ears, and the nasal tip leave no clues on the underlying bony parts. You can, with equal facility, model on a Neanderthaloid skull the features of a chimpanzee or the lineaments of a philosopher. These alleged restorations of ancient types of man have very little, if any, scientific value, and are likely only to mislead the public. So put not your trust in reconstructions." Evolutionists even go so far as to attribute very different facial appearances to the same skull. One well-known example of this is the three completely different illustrations produced of the fossil known as Zinjanthropus. Evolutionists pick up their paintbrushes and draw imaginary creatures, thus try to produce false evidence for their theories, which are in fact devoid of any scientific proof. In reality, however, there is absolutely no concrete fossil evidence to substantiate the image of the imaginary ape-man that so frequently appears in evolutionist publications. The way they resort to such imaginary reconstructions is an important indication of evolutionists' utter failure to find any real evidence.